Good morning, YouTube. So, it's time for our macroeconomics diagrams in this series. Remember, this series is all about all the important diagrams you need for IB economics. So, I finished microeconomic diagrams. Now I'm going to move on to the macroeconomics unit. And the macroeconomics unit starts with the three approaches to measuring GDP. Now I've included the circular flow of income because that helps us understand the three approaches to measuring GDP. So before I begin, always remember that national output is equal to national income is equal to national expenditure. Output, income, and expenditure are three sides of the same coin. I know coins only have two sides, but they're three sides of the same coin. Why is that? Because in order to actually produce output, you need inputs, and those inputs earn income. So the total value of the output of the economy must equal the total income generated in producing this output. Also, in order to spend, right, you have to earn income. So the total expenditure within the economy must equal the total income. So always remember this equation. Therefore, there are three approaches to measuring GDP. First of all, let's define GDP. GDP is the total monetary value of all final goods and services produced within an economy in 1 year or in 1 quarter. It could be every 3 months, okay? Basically, it's the total monetary value of all final goods and services produced within an economy during a period of time. Okay, the three approaches to measuring GDP. So here I included a circular flow of income model, but I only looked at the closed economy. I did not include the injections and the leakages, and you'll understand why. So basically, it starts with the households. The households are the owners of the factors of production. They go ahead and they sell their factors of production, land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship in the resource markets. And then the firms employ these factors of production, land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship. Okay, so that's the input flow. This top arrow here is the input flow. What do the firms do with these resources, these factors of production? Well, they use these factors of production to produce their output of goods and services. So they produce the goods and services, sell them in the product markets, and then the households buy these goods and services from the product markets. That's the output flow. However, there's an inner flow that we have to talk about, which is the flow of income, expenditure, costs, and revenue. When households sell or provide their factors of production in the resource markets, they earn income. The owners of land will earn rent. The owners of labor will earn wages. The owners of capital will earn interest, and the owners of entrepreneurship will earn profit. This arrow right here is GDP using the income approach. So I want you to remember this acronym, WERP, okay? GDP is equal to wages plus interest plus rent plus profit. The total wages earned by all owners of labor plus the total interest earned by all owners of capital plus the total rent earned by all owners of land and the total profit by all entrepreneurs. When you add all that up, that gives us GDP using the income approach. So it's this arrow right here. All right, let's continue. So what do the households do with this income? Well, they go and they buy goods and services from the product markets. So that money, that income is spent and it becomes household expenditure. They spend that on the goods and services in the product markets. Okay, this household expenditure becomes the firm's revenues. That's the revenue that firms earn. At the same time, whatever firms spend on the inputs, land, labor, capital, entrepreneurship, that becomes their costs of production. So here we can see the second approach to measuring GDP, which is this arrow right here, the revenues arrow. This is the output approach. The output approach to measuring GDP is basically the sum, this symbol here is sum, of total revenues of all businesses, okay, which is basically total revenue. We know that from microeconomics is price times quantity. So P1 times Q1 plus P2 times Q2 plus all the way to Pn times Qn. N is basically the number of firms, okay? So when you sum up the total revenue of all firms, within an economy earned during this time period, whether it's a quarter or a year, that's GDP using the output approach. Now I'm going to have to move on to the open economy model, because that's the one that includes the injections and the leakages. But before I do, remember, the expenditure approach to measuring GDP is this formula right here. C, which is household consumption expenditure. That's the only arrow you can see here. Household consumption expenditure, plus I, which is investment expenditure, plus G, which is government expenditure, plus X, which is export revenue. That's revenue earned from selling exports to other countries, minus M, which is import expenditure. We subtract M because GDP measures the total value of all final goods and services produced within an economy during a period of time. And when we use the expenditure approach, we're only looking at expenditure on domestic goods and services. And that is why we subtract M, because that's expenditure on foreign goods and services. So let's move on to the open economy model, so we see what that looks like with the expenditure approach on the next slide. So here's a sort of simplified circular flow of income for an open economy. We've kind of removed the product market and the resource markets, and we've simplified. Basically, we've got the factor incomes, which is the income flow right here, wages, rents, interest, and profit, and the consumption expenditure C. So remember, GDP using the expenditure approach is C plus I plus G plus X minus M. C is this arrow right here, household consumption expenditure. They're spending on domestic goods and services. Plus I is investment expenditure, which is an injection from the financial markets. The corresponding leakage for that injection is saving. Okay? Households and businesses sometimes save. Okay, this saving is channeled into financial markets, and then it provides the funds to finance investment expenditure. So that's I. Okay, so you've got C plus I. Plus G, government spending or government expenditure. That's basically spending by the government on domestic goods and services. How is that financed? What's the corresponding leakage? It's taxes. Okay, households and businesses pay taxes. That's a leakage. It flows into the government, and then the government uses that to finance government expenditure. That's plus G right here in the formula. Plus X. X is basically other countries spending on our exports, the goods and services that we sell to foreign countries. This is plus X. Now remember, I told you GDP using the output approach only calculates total expenditure on domestic goods and services. So we have to subtract any spending on imports, which is why we have minus M here. Minus M is import expenditure. And there you have it, the three approaches to measuring GDP. And we use the circular flow of income model to show this. Now, you don't actually have to add the product markets and the resource markets to the circular flow of income. You can just here add, so under the arrow that says factor incomes, you can add an arrow that points from households to businesses, and that's basically the inputs. And you can add an arrow that comes from firms to households, and that's basically the output of goods and services. So you can combine all three approaches in one circular flow of income model. All right, let me know if you have any questions. If you found this video useful, please press the like button, subscribe to the channel, consider becoming a member. I have lots of exclusive content for members, and I hope you have a great rest of your week. Bye.